Welcome, everyone. Today we are talking about parenting with cancer. This is an educational series, and this session is focused on session A. My name is Sam North, and I will be presenting. I have my master's in international disaster psychology. I'm completing my PsyD in clinical psychology, and I'm currently a health psychology intern doing a rotation at Carbone Cancer Center. There are 4 objectives for this session. They're listed here. First, the goal is to help develop a better understanding of the importance of caring for oneself when you have a cancer diagnosis, and to learn a few new coping skills for how to do that. Another goal is to learn strategies for how to talk about children about a cancer diagnosis, how to keep an eye out and assess for how kids are coping and adjusting to a cancer diagnosis in the family, and then learning about other resources and organizations that support children and family with a cancer diagnosis. So that is the goal of the session today. Just wanted to start with a few statistics. So in terms of parents with cancer, in general, there were over 1.9 million new cancer diagnoses that were expected in 2023. And so that equates to nearly 3 million children and adolescents that have a parent in the United States who has or has had cancer. And of the newly diagnosed adults with cancer, about 1 in 5 have children under the age of 18 years old. So this is important because it really speaks to how prevalent this is and how there are many families kind of grappling with what this looks like within their own family system. I also just want to share that these statistics don't encompass all family systems or dynamics, so might not include grandparents, multi-generation families, or other identified caregivers within a family system that might have cancer. And so just want to acknowledge that while this is titled Parenting with Cancer, this can be for any caregiver within a child's life. Okay, so next we want to talk a little bit about competing needs, because we know from research that parents or caregivers with a diagnosis of cancer, one of the main stressors is trying to balance competing needs and responsibilities, and there are a lot. So this is just a sample of them. This is not complete. There can be other needs that are not captured within this, but just thinking about needs as an adult or a caregiver, pre-cancer diagnosis, and then with a cancer diagnosis, there's just additional responsibilities that tend to pile up. I want to focus a little bit on the self bubble. If you recall on this past slide, the self bubble was made small for a reason. For many people, this bubble is really hard. It can be smaller than the others because it can feel harder to manage, or it can feel like a priority that's not as important as others. And so I want to spend a little bit of time on this bubble today. So I start with the term self-care. This term is often a buzzword. It has gotten a lot of attention in recent years, and it can be called many things, but the general purpose is to find intentional space that contribute to your well-being throughout your life. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. And for folks watching this, I encourage you to think about what comes to mind when you hear the term self-care. Some people might have a reaction to that or what that means to them. And think a little bit about, why is self-care important, or what are the reasons that you think self-care might be important? I think when talking about self-care, it's always important to kind of address some of these myths that come up about it. The first myth is that self-care is all or nothing. And what I mean by this is, I think sometimes the idea of self-care is that it needs to be a long commitment, it needs to be a weekend away at a spa, but truly self-care can be just a few minutes during the day. It can be reflecting on things that you have gratitude for. It can be taking a few moments to be mindful in the shower. It can be paying attention to how you're breathing for a few minutes. So knowing that there's lots of ways that self-care can look. Another myth is that self-care isn't for everybody. So research shows that everyone can benefit from self-care, and it doesn't look the same for any two people. And so I think that's important to know too, that there's not a right way to have self-care in your life, or a right way to incorporate it. Another myth is that self-care requires resources you don't have. So you don't need anything tangible in order to do self-care. And I think that's really important. Self-care doesn't have to cost anything, and you don't have to go out and buy anything or have anything to do it. Examples of self-care could be taking in your surroundings when you're on a walk. It could be petting the family dog and feeling the fur. It could be sipping morning coffee. So it doesn't have to be extravagant. Another myth that I like to talk about is that self-care is anything that soothes you. I think this is important to address because there are some strategies that we as people, humans have that they find to cope that can be harmful or might have been adaptive at one point in life and maybe are less adaptive or less helpful now. And so when thinking about choices for self-care, really wanting to find activities or find moments that are adding to health, that are benefiting and supporting health. And then self-care is selfish. This one comes up a lot when people say, I don't have time for myself. I'm not able to engage in self-care. And really, we find the opposite is true. Often taking time to have some self-care, to make time for yourself can make you more present and more available to others. It really can help increase that capacity. The next piece that I want to talk about is the oxygen mask metaphor. Folks might have heard of this before, but for anyone that's flown on a plane, there is a speech that happens where they say, should an emergency situation occur, please put down on your own oxygen mask that will drop down before you put on others or before you attempt to help those around you. And the idea of why we compare this to self-care is that in order to take care of others, it's important to first meet some of your own needs. Otherwise, you won't have the capacity to take care of others. And so we think about this a lot, especially for parents and caregivers that understandably and so thoughtfully want to put their children first. And just want to gently bring people back to this metaphor that while that's a lovely sentiment, it's also really important to do things for yourself in order for you to be able to take care of your kids and the other things that are important to you in life. Okay. So just want to touch on self-care activities. These are what people do. These are daily choices in our lives that can become habits. This is just a visual showing lots of different things that can be self-care. It can be breathing, it can be writing in a journal, it can be going to a park, petting an animal, looking at art, watching something funny. This is just a sampling, but there are so many different activities out there. And there might be things that you already do or things that might be of interest to try to incorporate into the day. Okay, there are several different types of self-care. And just want to hit on these different ones because it can be important to know that self-care doesn't look like one thing. When I talk to people about self-care, a lot of times I think the image that comes up is this idea of mental self-care. So there's this vision of meditating or writing in a journal, which can absolutely be forms of self-care. Another type of mental self-care could be taking a break from technology, putting away the phone, putting away screens, and just disconnecting from a bit. But there are many other realms of self-care outside of mental health self-care. So emotional self-care is another example. This can be watching a movie that really moves you, listening to music that's inspiring. This can be a self-affirmation, and a self-affirmation is something like a phrase or a saying that's positive, that you can say out loud to yourself, that you can write down. It could be, I am enough. I can get through hard things. I am worthy, whatever that might mean to you. Setting boundaries and asking for help is also a really, really important one. A lot of times we have parents and caregivers share that asking others for help is really difficult. And being able to do that can be a form of self-care. Physical is another category that's familiar to folks. Healthy eating, physical activity, proper sleep, sleep being a very, very important one and one that we know can be difficult or challenging for a variety of reasons. And then we have a few other categories too. So spiritual doesn't necessarily equate to religious, but it might be for some people. But this can also be spending time in nature, reflecting on your values or what's important to you, volunteering or participating in activities that have a purpose. These can be recreational, and I think this is important too. Take time to do nothing. Maybe there's 10 minutes where you don't do anything on the to-do list and you just sit and you just exist. And that can be a beautiful form of self-care. It could be playing board games, doing puzzles, reconnecting to hobbies that maybe you had before or ones that you've always been wanting to try. Social, spending time with people you enjoy. This can also be connecting through FaceTime, phone calls, writing letters. And then also knowing that there's a lot of different support groups in the community that can be helpful and sometimes provide a form of self-care because they're allowing you to be in a space with someone that can relate to what you're going through. And then environmental is the last type of self-care I wanted to touch on. And this can be just really paying attention to your environment or what's around you. So this can be using our five senses to think about, what do I see around me? What do I feel? This can look like arranging or decluttering spaces. For some people, that can have a really calming effect, or exploring somewhere new. So again, this was just an overview to kind of show that there are many, many different types of self-care that exist. And then I also wanted to speak to this idea of self-management or self-care in cancer. And so knowing that folks that have a cancer diagnosis, those that are going through treatment, that these are things that are additional aspects of self-care that you're kind of prompted to do or likely might be doing without thinking it as a type of self-care, but doing things that support physical and mental health, engaging with your healthcare team and adhering or following the treatment recommendations, being mindful of your personal health status and symptoms, and then knowing that you're managing the impact of cancer on several different areas of life. So just wanted to add in there that there's this presence with cancer of self-management that kind of demands to be seen and things that you might already be doing, but also recognizing that these can be an extra responsibility or feel like extra work too. Okay, with all of this being said, know it's important, know it's helpful, and we know it's really hard to do sometimes, and that there can be a lot of barriers to being able to take care of oneself or to manage these things that are coming up. For some people, there's financial pieces that get in the way. There can be side effects from um, the treatment that can be really interfering with ability to do things daily, physical limitations. A big one that comes up a lot is scheduling or logistics. And I think the biggest phrase I hear is there's no time for this. And I think for that one, it's understandable. And I think that's why it's encouraged of self-care can look like just a few minutes a day and doesn't have to be carving out another hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, or something that feels unrealistic. The emotional impact of things that folks are going through, energy and motivation, that one comes up a lot. Like, it is very hard for me to do anything if I have a down moment. Um, Difficulties of health literacy, that can mean kind of difficulty understanding all the details and nuances of what's going on in one's life with their health, a sense of loss of control, there's a host of others that can come up. So just wanting to acknowledge and be aware of that there are many barriers to self-care, and sometimes kind of pausing and thinking, what are your own barriers to self-care can kind of be a great first step in thinking about how might I navigate these to be able to build this into my life a little bit more. And I'm sure there are others not listed. Okay, so I wanted to share um, this idea of understanding our brains a little bit more and how just one reason why self-care can be important. This is what we talk about as the hand model of the brain. And so the different parts of our hand can represent different parts of the brain. So we think about the fingers being the cerebral cortex, the fingertips being the neocortex or the prefrontal cortex. We think about the thumb being the limbic region, and then this can kind of be our base of our skull and our spinal cord down here. So the idea is when our brain is working efficiently, um, our fingers, our cortex, and our limbic system, these work really well together and they're communicating, information comes in, and we're able to process it. But sometimes, especially in situations that are overwhelming or stressful, too much information is coming in and our cortex, our upstairs brain can't process it. It gets to be too much and it disconnects. This is what we call kind of flipping our lid. So our upstairs brain is no longer talking to our downstairs brain. Okay, so when that happens, we are more influenced by our emotion or by our downstairs brain. We flipped our lid and our logic, our thinking that we normally are using is up here. This can be a really good model to share with kids too if they're getting really upset about something, or if you were to get upset and want to explain to them maybe what happened, the hand model can be really nice. The way we bring in self-care to this is there's different strategies like deep breathing that when we utilize them, it can help calm this upper part of our brain and help it come back down so that they can communicate and work together again. Another version of this that we use for kids a lot is the more simplified upstairs brain that helps us think before we act. It has our decision making. And then our downstairs brain, this is where like our survival, our safety is, our big emotions. And so this can just be helpful to think about in terms of both managing emotions for ourselves, talking to kids about them, and it kind of shows why these self-care activities can be important because inherently having a cancer diagnosis can be a stressful addition. And so knowing that the brain might need just a little extra support communicating to each other throughout those stressful times. Okay. I want to talk through a few examples of self-care in practice. These have links that will go to videos that folks can do to learn a little bit more. The first one is diaphragmatic breathing. Deep breathing, belly breathing has lots of names. A lot of times people might say, why is breathing a tool? I already breathe, which is true. We all breathe. We breathe throughout the day, but we aren't taking time focusing on our breathing. It's automatic. We're not aware of it. And most of the time we breathe up here with our chest. Diaphragmatic or belly breathing is a way that helps us breathe more deeply, use our stomach to help us breathe. And doing this deeper breathing, this belly breathing, actually can have a really calming effect on our nervous system and be a really helpful tool. It takes practice. It's not something that we're used to doing. And so that link there kind of shows a video of practicing the inhale and exhale to get our bodies in that system of breathing more deeply. Progressive muscle relaxation is another skill. This is one where you kind of systematically go from your toes to your nose, of squeezing different muscle groups, holding them tensed, and then relaxing them. And this can be a really great tool if there's a lot of tension or right before bed, things that can be calming. For this one, it's just always important to listen to your body and be mindful if there's an area that is sensitive to tensing, then follow what your body's needing. But this is a guided video you can watch as well. And then guided imagery. This is where a recording or a script will kind of talk you through envisioning some sort of scene. A lot of times it's outdoors, and it can be helpful for the mind to kind of take a break and go into that space. Again, these are all examples that will be available in the PowerPoint to connect to. The one I want to focus on to kind of go over and practice is called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is a form of grounding. Grounding means bringing ourselves to the present moment. So bringing ourselves to what's happening right now. A lot of times anxiety um, is caused because we're worried about something that's going to happen, or we're thinking about something that happened in the past. And so grounding can be a really good strategy of bringing us to this moment. So the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 goes along with our senses. There's a little image of it here. So if I were to ground here, I could sit in my chair and I would first think, what are 5 things that I can see around me? When doing this, you can think it in your head, you can name it out loud, you can write it down, but I would go through and think about what are 5 things I can see, what are 4 things I can feel. So this could be, I feel the smoothness of the armrests on my chair. I feel the softness of my shirt. Maybe I can feel my heart beating in my chest. Go on to things that you can hear, anything you can smell, and if there's anything you can taste. So this is something that you can do in any environment that you're in. But we also recognize that sometimes you might be in an environment where it's more anxiety producing to really pay attention to where you are. So some people will say, like, when I'm about to get a scan, that environment's really anxious to me. Or if I'm in the doctor's office, that's really anxiety provoking for me. And so what's great about this tool is you can also use it for when you are in a place where you aren't feeling the safest or the most comfortable. And you can do that by visualizing. So where is a place that feels really safe, very comforting to you? And then you can close your eyes or sit quietly and think about, if I were in that place, what would be the 5 things I could see when I'm there? What can I feel when I'm there? What can I hear? What can I smell? What can I taste, or what might I eat or drink in that space? And that can be a really lovely way to transport you to that place where you feel a little more safe. Again, so many options for self-care. Just wanted to give a few different ideas of what this could look like and for practice. But the idea is to try out different things and see what works best for you, because it's not one size fits all, and some things will work really well for some and not well for others. All right, we are going to transition into talking to and supporting kids through cancer. So a lot of this section is really based on research and child development and thinking about what ways that kids learn best. I do want to give the really strong caveat that cultural and family systems can look really different. This is just one idea, one guide of how this can look. It's not the only way or the guaranteed right way. And it's completely okay and encouraged to think about how your family values and your cultural values could be integrated into this and how that might shape these conversations or these guidelines looking different. So first, just starting with a few general tips. So the first is, there's not a perfect way to talk to your child. And I think this is really helpful to keep in mind because a lot of times people want one perfect way, exact words to say, and that's not the case. Another is that we recommend not keeping a cancer diagnosis a secret from children. The reason for this is because kids are very smart and very intuitive, and they often can tell something is wrong, whether or not parents or caregivers or people are telling them. If a child thinks that something is wrong, a lot of times they will make up something in their head, and they might blame themselves or make up something that feels even scarier to them. Another tip is, it's good to give space for questions, and it's really okay to say, I don't know, if you don't know the answer. You can be honest about things you don't know about, rather than guessing or making something up. And that's perfectly okay to say, I don't know. It's also okay if in these conversations, kids say they don't have questions. They might come up later or they might not want to ask anything. And then it's really important when having conversations with kids to keep the conversation simple and to use developmentally appropriate and concrete language. So we want to use concrete phrases because figurative language can add to confusion and fear. A concrete example in this context could be mom is going to lose her hair. For kids, that can be a little confusing, especially if they're still in that state in concrete terms, like, how are you going to lose your hair? Are we going to have to go find it? Is my hair going to get lost? And so being really concrete that because of the medicine mom is taking, mom's hair is going to fall out. And then any questions that might come along with that. That's just an example, but something that sometimes comes up is just a way that we can use this really concrete, specific language with children. A few other tips is trying to make promises that you can't keep. It's absolutely okay to reassure kids, to let them know you're there for them, and just being mindful to not make a promise that we might end up having to go back on, even if you don't mean to later. Letting kids know what to expect from treatment to the best of your knowledge can be really helpful. So this can include information about treatment generally. This could be a schedule or a calendar of when you might be gone for treatment. This could talk about physical side effects that might happen. Maybe dad's going to probably take more naps because medicine might make him tired. Things like that. Information might need to be repeated, or you might need to share explanations again. It's a lot of information to take in. It might seem like a kid has forgotten or wasn't listening. It's not uncommon and doesn't mean that they weren't hearing you or paying attention. But sometimes for kids, they need to hear it multiple times to really process the information. And then kids can benefit from a variety of ways to express themselves. So not all kids like to talk, and not all kids are able to express how they're feeling through words, especially depending on their age or developmental level. So some kids better express themselves through drawing, through artwork, through play. These are not just okay, they can be really healthy. So just being mindful that if a child isn't wanting to talk, doesn't mean that they might not be processing the information in other ways too. Okay, the next is talking about cancer. How do we explain that word? How do we use that word? Should we use the word cancer? We often recommend using the actual language. Using the term cancer can be helpful. There's different ways to explain it depending on a kid's age, but we might talk about our bodies are made up of cells. Cancer is when our cells don't grow right. They keep dividing. They make the body sick. It might cause a lump or a bump to grow. It can make different parts of the body sick. There's different kinds of cancer that have its own name in medicine. Lots of different ways to kind of explain this. There's a really wonderful resource on this together with St. Jude, and they have a list of different definitions that can be explained in kid-friendly language, from chemotherapy and ports and cancer and all of those things. So this can be a really great language, or excuse me, a really great resource. You don't have to start from scratch and make up the language or try to figure it all out on your own. There's lots of different ways to talk about it, or to talk about the different parts of treatment in kid-friendly ways as well. And later we'll talk about some resources on what that could look like too. Okay. So we know not all kids are the same age, and different kids will need different support and what this conversation might look like. First is that you know your child best. You know them in terms of their maturity level, their comprehension, their attention span. Some kiddos might have special needs or cognitive challenges, it might fit into these age brackets differently. So you know your child best and have a sense of what might be the most helpful in terms of what type of language to use and approach to take. It can be really helpful to prepare what you'll say. A lot of times we encourage this could look like having a conversation with a friend or a partner and practicing and then getting their feedback. Is there anything that was confusing that you shared? Is there a facial expression you made that might be really scary? It can also be really helpful to say it out loud, either to yourself or in the mirror. A lot of people find that they're not fully prepared for the emotional reaction that they might have when they do say it out loud. So we just recommend saying it out loud one time before, at least before you say it with your child. Trying to use a calm tone of voice can be important. Children often will follow a parent or caregiver's lead and will really pick up on the tone or mood that you share something with. Also can be really great to try to choose an appropriate time. Information, not right before they leave for school so that they have to think about it at school all that day. Not when you or they are feeling really upset or really cranky. All that being said, there's never going to be a perfect time. There is not a time that's going to feel good to give a kiddo hard news or to share with them something like this, but can kind of be mindful and strategic about what might be a good time. When is time that they have a little space to process or to come back and forth with questions? When might you be available to kind of be there as things come up for them? And so keeping that in mind. This is also a really common question that we get of um, what what does this look like for me? I don't want my child to see me upset or cry. But it's important to know that you're allowed to have emotions, and this can actually be a great time to model for your kids that it's okay to feel a range of emotions. Um, if you were to become upset, it can be really helpful to say, gosh, mom is feeling really sad about this right now. And could also model maybe how you get support. So I am feeling really sad right now. I I think I'm gonna go get a hug. So just kind of giving those examples of what that can look like. Again, it's personal preference and you don't have to share emotion. Um, but knowing that it's okay to do so and finding a balance too of being able to share emotion and also not putting all the responsibility for kids to take care of parents or caregivers. Next up is balancing how much information you share. So watch your children for cues. If they change the subject or try to distract you, that might be a sign that they're saying, this is too much right now. I need a little bit of a break. Um, It's also helpful to ask what they already know because sometimes kids will surprise people by knowing more than what you think. Also, really helpful to validate their feelings, letting them know that it's okay to feel anything that comes up for them. And then just being aware that all kids might respond differently. So if they focus on themselves and how um, this change is going to impact them, that's okay and can be really developmentally appropriate for certain ages. They might have 100 questions, they might have no questions, they might get mad, they might cry, they might act like it's no big deal. This is all okay, as there's not a right way or a wrong way to respond. And being prepared for that and also letting them know that can be really helpful in these conversations. Okay, I want to touch a little bit on the different age groups um, and information that can be important in thinking about these conversations. The American Cancer Society also has a really extensive website of helping children understand cancer in a parent or caregiver. And so these links will bring you to that website here as well if wanting to read a little bit more about a certain age group. I'm just going to hit the highlights. So the first group is for our littles, for these kids up to age 3. For kids in this age group, it's really hard for them to understand concepts that aren't concretely in front of them. So for kids this age, it can be really helpful to follow their same routines, to let them FaceTime with parents or caregivers if they're in the hospital, um, to really talk about what's happening here and now, and not to get too future focused with them because that can be overwhelming and confusing. Reassuring them that mommy, daddy, whoever the caregiver is, will be back. And sometimes for kids, it can be helpful at this age to have a countdown too. So maybe we have a countdown that there's 3 more sleeps until mommy comes home from the hospital. That can just be a way where they can kind of understand or feel like they're a little more involved. And then kids this age often, depending on the child, need that physical affection, that physical reassurance, so might want extra cuddles and extra hugs. Okay, for age 4 to 6, kind of this preschooler age, kids this age also can't grasp complexity. So when thinking about cancer being like a sickness or an illness, they might think, oh, this is like a cold, this is something you can catch. And so that's part of why that concrete language can be really helpful. For kids this age, there might be a regression in behavior that could look like having accidents if they were already potty trained, could be trouble sleeping or not wanting to sleep alone in their own bed, might look like more tantrums that are familiar from like a toddler stage. It can be really helpful to give kiddos this age choices, figure out what they understand, let them know they'll be taken care of. This is a common age group where talking might be harder, but using art or playing to explore how they're doing could be helpful. Um, it can be helpful to still teach them healthy ways to cope. So just because you give them hard news doesn't mean that we suddenly want to allow kids to hit or kick, that we can talk about, I know you're feeling really upset. If we're feeling really angry, we can yell into our pillow, or we can do jumping jacks, and giving them healthy ways to kind of cope with these big feelings that are coming up that can feel really scary to deal with. Similar to the younger age group, routines are really helpful. And then monitoring them for changes in behavior. And you'll see some of these are themes throughout the different age groups. Okay, for our elementary school kiddos, they're a little more able to understand cancer and future-oriented ideas. This age, they may be hiding their distress because they don't want to further upset loved ones or people they care about. Um, Depending on their developmental level, it can be helpful to keep them up to date on treatment and changes. This is kind of the time where it can be really helpful too to pull in teachers or coaches or other people, other adults that are involved in kids' life that can help kind of monitor how things are going. Um, Keeping involved in extracurricular activities and still having fun can be really important. And then encouraging them to stay connected in ways that feel good with the parent or caregiver too. Then for teens, teens are really at this point where they can understand how this might impact the future, the complexities of it. Teens might act out if they're distressed. For this age group, it can be helpful to think through, okay, if a caregiver needs to be present, who's a person that you're comfortable with? Who might you want to be home if the primary parent or caregiver can't be? Again, working on what are some healthy ways to cope with these feelings. Um, for teens, because of where they are developmentally, they might be really focused on how is this going to impact their social life? What am I supposed to tell my friend? Or like, oh, I don't want to have to tell friends about this. Again, keeping other adults in their life informed. They should also be encouraged to keep having fun and spending time with their friends. And then for some, teens might really want to like help out or know what they can do. It's okay for them to help out around the house or to pick up some extra chores if that's helpful, but also making sure to balance their support with still letting them be a kid for as much as they're able to as well. And then a lot of times this can be tricky, but teenagers sometimes will shut down a little more and be really reluctant to talk about their thoughts or feelings. And just knowing that that's okay, and there's lots of different outlets for what support might look like. Okay, a few common questions that might come up during this conversation. So we share these because it can be helpful to kind of have in mind that these are common ones that might come up and have a sense of how might you respond so it maybe doesn't catch folks as off guard. So what is cancer? Where is it? Can you see it? That comes up a lot. Why did you get it? This can be one where I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer because there are lots of instances where can't pinpoint where cancer came from or why someone got it when someone else didn't. Is it contagious? This can be really helpful for um, kids because they can be worried that they could get it and that they don't want to get cancer. And so letting them know that it's not contagious. Sometimes kids will worry like I did something wrong and that's why mommy or daddy got cancer. And so reassuring them that there's nothing that they did or didn't do that could lead to it. Sometimes it's a confusing concept for kids of why a parent or caregiver isn't necessarily getting better with medication or why they're having really negative side effects from medication. A lot of times, kids' experience with medicine is um, I don't feel good. Maybe I take some children's Motrin and I feel better. And so it can be a really confusing concept that it's medicine that's making a parent's hair fall out, or it's medicine that's making them so tired, or medicine that's making them throw up or feel sick. That can just be a little bit of an overwhelming concept for kids. The physical symptoms or changes is something that particularly younger kids get really fixated on. Will it grow back? Where did it go? This can be really distressing for kids to see that physical change. So just being mindful that that can come up. Am I going to get cancer? That kind of comes along with it. Is it contagious? Just worried about how this could impact them. Similarly, who will take care of me? So being really worried, okay, if something's happening with mom or dad or grandpa or caregiver, who's going to take care of me? And then, are you going to die? This can be a really heavy question. This one can take a lot of people, catch them off guard. So just being mindful that this might come up and how you might address that. Okay, a few additional notes. If you have kids of different ages, it can be helpful to tell them separately, just because a 3-year-old and a 15-year-old might need to hear the information in really different ways. If kids are similar in age, it also is fine to tell them together, but siblings sometimes will want to turn to each other for support too. Having another adult be able to provide additional attention or special time with kids after they found out can be helpful. Um, this can be good in general, but also as a way to let them know that there are other people in their lives that they can talk to about this. So kids will often hear information about cancer in popular media, at school, in movies. And so it can be really helpful to encourage open conversations and space for them to ask new questions or to debunk myths because those things might come up. And then discussing how family will share information can be important. It can be really helpful to kind of sit down and think about what boundaries are important to our family and how we talk about this. We don't recommend asking kids to keep it a complete secret. That can be such a weight, such a burden for them to carry around. But a boundary could be, um, I'm not comfortable with you posting about this on social media yet, or these are the people that we've shared it with. Just being mindful so that this doesn't come up after the fact as a conversation. And then counselors or other support people might be helpful through this time. So just knowing that there are mental health therapists, there are people that can support the person with cancer, the family, children, and those dynamics. And sometimes it can be really helpful to have that outside support during this time. Okay. A few parenting strategies. A lot of times people will have questions about, does parenting look different now that I have cancer or now that I am putting my child through this, is a thought that people have sometimes. The first one that we like to talk about is that routines and schedules are really important, and that this is actually a huge factor in helping kids through difficult situations. So, as much as able, trying to stick to their routine or schedule, um, understanding that changes might need to be made or it might look a little different, but trying to come up with a general routine so they know what to expect, because this can really increase a sense of safety. Discipline. This comes up all the time because many parents or caregivers feel that they shouldn't discipline their children because they're already going through something really hard by having a parent or caregiver diagnosed with cancer. But what research has actually found that keeping consistent rules and boundaries can be more helpful, um, because when rules and boundaries stop, it can make them feel like they don't know what to expect. It can be scary. That consistency can really be comforting. Um, and so, if a child is acting out, you can help with finding healthy ways to cope. But if you already had rules and boundaries in place, trying to stick to those and keep those as they were before. Next, letting them be kids. So, this can be really helpful for separating out adult worries and kid worries. For younger kids, this might even look like making a jar that says adult worries, making a jar that says child worries. And if a kiddo is worried about something, helping them figure out what's a responsibility that you as the parent or caregiver will take on and what are things that they can worry about. Again, not telling them that they can't worry about your health or things like that, but um, worrying about financials, that's an adult worry. Worrying about math test tomorrow, that's a kid worry. And that's absolutely something that you can take on to worry about as your math test. So that can just be helpful to kind of talk through with them. Kids like choices. So being able to give them a choice between A and B whenever possible can be really helpful to establish kind of a sense of control. Can be helpful to stay in touch with kids when you have to be away. So this can be a plan ahead of time. Not all hospitalizations or appointments and things like that are planned far in advance. So being aware of that. But it can also be helpful to think about what's a transitional object that a parent or child could have. So maybe um, mom and kiddo have matching bracelets, and when mom goes to the hospital for chemo, they both wear their matching bracelets, and it helps them know that they're thinking of each other. Or maybe mom brings a picture to the hospital of kiddos if she has to be admitted so that she can look at it, and the kids know that the picture of them is there with her. Um, this could also be scheduling phone calls or FaceTimes or things like that. Another one is providing reassurance, not promises. So this could be like, no matter what happens, you'll always be cared for. Um, that kind of goes away from the promise of nothing's going to happen to me, I'm going to be fine. While we hope that that's true in lots of situations, it can be really upsetting and hard to process if then that were to change later on. Another one is trying to reduce stress and family tension when possible. So utilizing those networks of support when able to, um, trying to have disagreements out of sight and out of earshot, um, but also very mindful that people have um, different resources and this might look different within families. But just knowing that stress can increase when a family is dealing with a cancer diagnosis, so trying to find ways to reduce stress and tension when possible. And then help children respond to other people's reactions about this information. So, for example, teenagers might be really focused on this is embarrassing, or might be aware of, oh, my parent doesn't have hair anymore. It can be really helpful to think through how the school will be informed, who will be told at the school, social media guidelines. Um, if peers ask your child at school about it, maybe practicing with them what they might say or gentle ways for them to say they don't want to talk about it. Um, just kind of thinking through what it might look like to interact with other people about this information. Okay, there's a few special considerations that I wanted to talk about. Um, these are just different family dynamics that can be impacted uniquely by a cancer diagnosis. Um, for divorced families, this can really have complicated feelings or more grief because a child might be with one parent only part of the time. Um, for a single parent, if a child has already lost a parent, this can really lead to high levels of anxiety. Um, and either whether it's lost a parent or they've always been in a single parent household, this can bring up a lot of fear of who's left to take care of me. What would this look like? Um, for parents who aren't married, sometimes um, kids or parents or caregivers can be worried about kind of the legal and financial arrangements and what that might look like. Um, for children that are in LGBTQIA positive or gender nonconforming family or parenting systems, um, they might already be in positions where they feel a little more isolated or that they have a unique experience. And so this can be an experience that might feel further isolating. Like, wow, I already didn't know maybe a lot of families that had this system, and now my family also has cancer, and it might be harder just to find those people that can connect or relate to that level as well. And then for adopted and foster kiddos, um, they may feel less less secure in their placement. They might feel like they not belong. They might feel like they're in a unstable environment then, or worry that they won't be able to remain with a family. And this can also bring up really complex feelings for children if it's a birth parent that is the one with cancer too. Um, there also could be other non-traditional family structures of living with a grandparent or a relative that's primary caretaker that could be impactful too. So just thinking about there's lots of layers of complexity for different families, different populations that could be impacted just differently. Okay. So a lot of times people might wonder, ask, how can I make sure my kid's doing okay? How do I make sure that they're adjusting? So for a lot of kids, they might show that they're feeling something rather than telling. So this can be extra clinginess. This could be acting out of character. Something that can be helpful is talking to those teachers, those coaches, those other adults and saying, what are you noticing? Are you noticing any changes in them? Anything that's coming up that seems different? You might see more physical symptoms in kiddos, so they might be complaining of stomach aches more, or headaches more. There might be sleep changes, so might want to co-sleep, might have trouble falling asleep, might have nightmares. Sleep can really be impacted. Mood changes, this could look like um, being more sad. This could also look like being more irritable. Something that's helpful to just keep an eye out for is safety concerns. So any thoughts of suicide that a child could be having, any desire or acting out of harming themselves can be helpful. Um, these can be signs that they're just maybe having a harder time or could use some extra support. Cognitively, this could look like having more worry, but this could also look like I'm having a really hard time paying attention in class, or um, I'm having these intrusive thoughts about the cancer or things that I can't stop thinking about. This could also look like maybe there's more separation anxiety, maybe grades are slipping, maybe a child saying that they're not hungry or they're hungrier than normal, different energy levels, maybe withdrawing to their room more. So again, I think the positive, the benefit here is that parents and caregivers know their child best. So they know what's typical for them and what's not. And so just tuning in, listening to that gut feeling, that parenting instinct that something seems off, and knowing that while some of these reactions can be normal, it can also be really helpful to monitor and keep an eye on when it might be helpful for kids to have some extra support. Okay, and these are broken up into some books about cancer by different age groups. Um, so this is a list of different ones. Um, these can be really helpful for guiding some conversations with kids, for answering questions. This can be a way to tell them that's a little more interactive than sitting down and just having a conversation, which can be hard with attention span. So these kind of talk about um, not just cancer, but kind of separation and other hard things. For elementary age, similar talk about what happens when someone has cancer. Cancer Party kind of explains different elements of cancer. So these are all books, most all are available on Amazon, but might be available in other spaces in the community too to utilize. For teens, there's a few um, guides or books as well. But for teens, it can also be helpful to think about like where is someone dealing with cancer portrayed more in a fictional setting, because sometimes that can be an easier way to connect with what's going on. So there's a list of kind of some fiction books as well that might be helpful or might be a place where a teen feel like they can connect. And then some organizations that offer support. So these are a few different places. Camp Kesem is a place for kids who have a parent with cancer. Um, that can be a fun place where there's still camp activities. Kids can still feel like kids, but they also have this really nice connection of people understanding what they're going through. The Angels Foundation camp is another camp that can be helpful for kids to attend. And then Gilda's Club is an organization um, that can be for um, folks with cancer, family and friends supporting them, children of people with cancer, children with a caregiver with cancer. They have support groups, they have some individual offerings, and they have lots of other activities to kind of create this community or this support to kind of bolster this idea that your kids aren't alone, you're not alone, kind of forming this community. This is not exhaustive. There are other resources out there, but these are some really helpful ones local to the Madison area or in Wisconsin. If there are questions, please feel free to reach out to the contact information provided. Thank you so much for attending session A. Hope that this was helpful to talk a little bit more about what it looks like for parenting with cancer. Thank you.